Russia is now 600 missiles and 12 days into its violent effort to take over the sovereign nation of Ukraine. Hundreds of civilians are reported dead and more than 1 million refugees are fleeing the destruction of their homeland. Congressman John Garamendi, the chairman of the House Armed Services Subcommittee and one of the lawmakers who spoke with the president of Ukraine over the weekend, with me now live. Congressman, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you.
The world has gotten a very distinct picture of Ukrainian President Zelensky standing with his people, standing up to President Putin, unflinchingly, really. What were your impressions of him, talking with him over the weekend?
Well, we spent nearly an hour on that Zoom call, and I must tell you, Zelensky is an extraordinary individual. He is the #1 person on Putin's hit list. He knows that his life is endangered every moment. But yet he has very strong motivation and courage. And what he has done is to rally his people and really rally the rest of the world. During that entire call, he covered 5 different issues completely and didn't miss a beat along the way. He talked with considerable determination, strength, obvious knowledge about what's going on in his communities. And he put it this way. He said, I will not leave. I am the head of state. I will do everything I possibly can to resist Putin and Putin's army. And he's in the business of doing that right now. He is, in fact, leading not only his country, but he's really leading the entire world to put Putin down.
Alrighty. I was just going to ask you about him and staying. He seems very committed, as you just referenced, to staying with the fight in Kyiv. But there is some talk that the U.S. and other aligned countries should support his government going into exile to protect him. Where do you stand with that idea? And do you have any sense that he might be convinced into leaving to protect his government in exile?
Well, the continuity of government is absolutely critical. It certainly is here in the United States. It's one of the major issues that we always deal with, the continuity of government. Similarly, in his country, we know that there is a plan for the continuity of the current Ukrainian government, the Zelensky government. That plan is secret, and I don't know the details of it. I don't know if that includes Zelensky leaving at some point or some other mechanism to continue the government. It would then become a government in exile. No way do the NATO nations, the EU, or most of the world want or willing to accept a government imposed in Ukraine by Putin. That is not going to be acceptable to the entire world. Okay. So there will be a government in exile should Kyiv fall.
Got it.
Now, the fall of Kyiv is not anytime soon. That is not going to happen without a horrible fight in the city of 4 million people.
And we know that they have been taking the fight to the Russians. Now, Zelensky has called for the closure of airspace over Ukraine or for more fighter jets as a way to combat Russia's air attack. I already mentioned 600 missiles fired so far. Yesterday, Zelensky warned that Russia was preparing to bomb the Black seaport city of Odessa after having already destroyed an airport in that region. Word out of the Kremlin is that any third parties like the U.S. and NATO allies that help to close airspace would be considered, quote, participants in a military conflict. Is it worth it or wise for the U.S. to get involved with that?
Well, the president has been very, very clear from the outset, and that is the United States will not put boots on the ground or planes in the air over Ukraine for the exact reason you said. That would lead to direct military conflict with Russia. And that has a whole series of consequences that we'd rather not get to. Now, the question is, can there be a no-fly zone over Ukraine? The answer is not without a very robust air force. Now, we're working to bring additional airplanes into the Ukrainian country using Russian made jet fighters that are currently owned by Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria.
Okay.
There is a real possibility that used MiG fighters may be on the market. If that's the case, then there's a possibility that Ukraine will be able to buy those used MiG fighters from countries nearby. That is the first step of a very complex problem. The rest of it is, where will those planes operate? What airfields are available in Ukraine? What kind of support services would be available? This is a major logistical challenge because many of the airports in Ukraine are already under bombardment
siege, yeah.
by Russia.
Exactly.
Nevertheless, there may be a solution. The rest of the solution lies in the 17,000 man-operated missiles that have been sent to Ukraine already. These are the Javelin missiles for use against heavy armor, the tanks and other heavy armor, as well as the missiles that are used for taking airplanes out of the sky. And those are also available, probably several thousand of those missiles. The Stinger missile is a very accurate, very deadly, short-range missile. Low-flying aircraft, helicopters, jets, low-flying are in severe jeopardy from those missiles, and there are several thousand in Ukraine already.
Congressman,
So together with the
Congressman, we're going to
yes.
have to put a pin in it there. I know there is so much on this topic, and we're always eager to have you back to explain. There's so many pieces to what's going on in the resolution that the whole world is looking for right now. So we appreciate you explaining to us what you were able to discuss with President Zelensky over the weekend and kind of how these things may go forward. Of course, we will have you back. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
You
Bye-bye.
too.